My name is Margaret Hensley. The day my sister-in-law left her son on my porch, I didn't know she was also leaving me with a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. It was a late autumn afternoon, the kind where the air feels sharp and smells faintly of burning leaves from someone's backyard. I had just finished the morning baking at my shop and was sitting at my kitchen table drinking lukewarm coffee when I heard the hurried knock at the front door. When I opened it, there stood Teresa, my sister-in-law, in a fitted leather jacket, sunglasses perched on her head despite the cloudy sky. In front of her was a small boy no more than 7 clutching a worn backpack with both hands like it was a life raft. "Hey Maggie," she said, her voice light, almost casual. "I need a big favor." I remember glancing at the boy, my nephew, whose big brown eyes avoided mine. He had a smudge of chocolate at the corner of his mouth, and his shoulders looked too small under the weight of the bag. "I just have to go handle something for a few days." Teresa continued, already stepping forward as if her decision had been made before I had the chance to respond. "It's complicated, but I can't take him with me." Her words felt rehearsed, the way someone might practice before asking a bank for a loan. My instinct was to ask questions, but the urgency in her movements and the way she avoided direct explanations stopped me. "What's going on? Where's my brother?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, you know how busy he is," she replied quickly, brushing the question away with a flick of her hand. "Look, I'll explain later. Just keep him for a bit. Please." Before I could press for answers, she bent down, hugged her son, a quick, tight squeeze that looked more like restraint than affection, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then she straightened up, gave me a smile that didn't touch her eyes, and walked back to her car. The door closed. The engine started, and by the time I realized, she had left no phone number, no time frame, not even a change of clothes for him. Beyond that backpack, she was already gone. I turned back to the boy. He stood still in my hallway, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Are you hungry?" I asked gently. He shrugged. I took his backpack and found inside only a few wrinkled t-shirts, one pair of jeans, a toothbrush without a cap, and a small toy car with one missing wheel. That was all. I should have called Teresa back immediately. I should have demanded she return. But something in the boy's posture, the way his eyes darted to the door and then quickly away, told me he'd already been through more goodbyes than a child should endure. That night, I set up the small guest room for him. The bedspread was a faded blue quilt my mother had sewn decades ago. I brought him a glass of milk, and he sat on the bed holding the toy car in one hand. "You can call me Aunt Maggie," I told him. "You're safe here." He nodded but said nothing. The silence between us was heavy, filled with questions neither of us knew how to ask yet. When I turned off the light, I heard him whisper something, maybe to the toy car, maybe to himself. It sounded like, "Don't forget me." I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering where Teresa had gone, and why she could abandon her child so easily. I didn't know then that a few days would stretch into something much longer, and that the weight of this night would only grow heavier with time. That was the first step into a story where love, betrayal, and survival would tangle together, and where I'd eventually be forced to choose between my own life and the little boy sleeping in the next room. The few days Teresa promised passed like autumn leaves, drifting away quietly at first, then all at once. At the end of the first week, I called her phone, straight to voicemail. I left a message asking when she'd be back. No reply. By the end of the second week, my messages had turned into pleading, then frustration. Still nothing. The boy, my nephew Liam, had settled into my home like someone camping in a borrowed cabin. He was polite, careful not to break anything, but always seemed ready to pack up and leave at a moment's notice. He'd sit at the kitchen table each morning while I prepared muffins and bread for the bakery, watching me but rarely speaking. One evening I tried again. "Liam, when's the last time you saw your mom?" He fidgeted with his spoon. "The day I came here, and before that I pressed." He shrugged. "She was busy." It was a child's answer, but the way his eyes clouded told me it wasn't the whole truth. I started taking him to the bakery with me every day. At first, customers cooed over him, offering cookies and asking if he wanted to help frost cupcakes. He'd nod politely, but the moment anyone asked about his parents, his shoulders stiffened and he'd find an excuse to walk away. Weeks blurred into months. My routine shifted completely. Early mornings were spent getting him dressed and fed before work. Afternoons were a balancing act, kneading dough while keeping an eye on him doing homework in the corner. Evenings became dinners for two, followed by quiet TV time, where he'd sometimes rest his head against my arm without a word. The hardest part was the not knowing. No letters, no phone calls, no sign that Teresa intended to return. My brother didn't reach out either. It was as if they'd both slipped into some parallel life where Liam and I didn't exist. By the third month, exhaustion crept into my bones. My bakery bills were piling up because I couldn't put in the same hours. The freezer broke, costing me half a week's revenue. And though I tried to hide it, Liam noticed the tension in my face when I sat down to balance the checkbook. One cold night after I thought he'd gone to bed, I found him in the kitchen, standing on a chair to reach the top shelf where I kept the savings jar. "What are you doing?" I asked, startled. He froze. I I was just looking." His cheeks turned pink, and then the truth tumbled out. "I wanted to see if there's enough for you, so you don't have to worry." That small act, misguided but full of care, broke something in me. I hugged him tightly, feeling the thinness of his arms, the fragility of his trust. But love alone doesn't pay the rent, keep the ovens running, or heal the gnawing worry that I was raising a child I wasn't prepared for. By month 4, I had to admit it, this was no longer temporary. And without answers from Teresa, the shadow of her absence loomed over every moment. I didn't know it yet, but the truth about her disappearance would soon find me, and it would sting more than the abandonment itself. The few days Teresa promised passed like autumn leaves, drifting away quietly at first, then all at once, until I could no longer tell where the waiting ended and the worrying began. At the end of the first week, I dialed her number, half expecting her to pick up with a rushed apology. Instead, the call went straight to voicemail. I left a polite message. "Hey Teresa, just checking in. Let me know when you'll be back for Liam." My tone light, as if I believed her absence was as harmless as she'd made it sound. By the second week, I was calling daily, my messages turning from friendly to pleading to something sharper, edged with frustration. I left voicemails at all hours early in the morning, before I opened the bakery late at night after Liam went to bed. Every time the same robotic voice. "The person you are trying to reach is unavailable." It felt like shouting into a canyon and hearing nothing but my own echo come back. Liam, my nephew, though, was starting to feel heavier than it should, had adapted to my home, like someone camping in a borrowed cabin. He was careful, polite, always aware he was a guest. He kept his backpack by the door, as if he might need to leave at a moment's notice. In the mornings, he'd sit at the kitchen table while I kneaded dough for the bakery, swinging his legs under the chair. He didn't chatter the way most children do. Instead, he observed, eyes following my hands as I shaped rolls or sprinkled cinnamon on pastries. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at the clock, as if measuring the time against something only he knew. One Wednesday evening, after closing up shop, I decided I needed answers. "Liam," I said gently over dinner, "when's the last time you saw your mom?" He pushed peas around his plate with his fork. "The day I came here." And before that, I pressed, careful not to sound accusing. He shrugged, keeping his gaze fixed on the peas. "She was busy." It was a child's answer, vague, unconvincing, but the flicker in his eyes told me there was more, something he either didn't want to share or had been told not to. I began taking him to the bakery every day. At first, customers thought it was charming. "Oh, is this your grandson?" one elderly regular asked, offering him a sugar cookie. Liam would smile, politely thank them, and nibble without looking up. But whenever someone asked where his parents were, he'd go rigid, mutter their away, and wander to the back room. By the end of the second month, my life had been completely reshaped. My mornings, once quiet and solitary, now began with getting him dressed and fed. At the bakery, my pace slowed. I couldn't take the same custom orders or cater events because I needed to keep one eye on him doing homework in the corner. My evenings turned into quiet dinners for two, followed by time in the living room, where he'd sit close enough for me to feel the warmth of his small frame against my side, yet never quite leaning in all the way. The exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was financial and emotional. My revenue dipped. The freezer broke, costing me half a week's income. I was dipping into savings I'd built over years, watching the jar on the top shelf of my pantry grow lighter. One cold night after I'd finished the dishes, I heard the faint scrape of a chair in the kitchen. I found Liam standing on it, reaching toward that jar. "What are you doing?" I asked, startled. He froze, hand hovering in midair. I I was just looking. Looking. His cheeks flushed. "I wanted to see if there's enough for you, so you don't have to worry." The simplicity of it hit me like a blow. This boy who had been abandoned by the very people meant to protect him was worrying about me. I lifted him off the chair and hugged him, feeling how thin his arms were, how tightly he held on. "You don't have to worry about me," I said, though we both knew it was a lie. By month 4, I could no longer pretend this was temporary. Teresa's silence was deliberate. My brother's absence, his refusal to check in, was a choice. The shadow of their abandonment stretched over every moment of my life, but especially over Liam's small, careful existence in my home. The strain began to show. My back ached from early mornings and late nights. My temper grew shorter when customers asked too many questions. And in the quiet moments, I caught myself resenting the fact that I hadn't chosen this, that someone else had made a life-altering decision for me without so much as asking. But then, I'd see Liam asleep on the couch, clutching his one-wheeled toy car, and guilt would wash over me. It wasn't his fault. He hadn't chosen any of this either. That winter, as the snow piled up outside, a thought I'd been pushing away started creeping in. What if I can't keep this up? I didn't yet know the answer, but I did know one thing: the truth about where Teresa had gone and why she had left him was going to come out. And when it did, it wouldn't just sting, it would burn. The truth is, I've always been stubborn about doing things myself. I built my bakery from scratch with no partners, no investors, and certainly no safety net. For years, that stubbornness felt like strength. But now, with a child depending on me, it felt like a slow suffocation. By the 5th month of Liam living with me, the toll was everywhere in my aching back. My bank account, my fraying patience. The bakery was suffering. I'd turned down 2 large catering orders because I didn't have the staff or time to manage them. The morning rush line was shorter than it had been the year before, and every night I took home trays of unsold pastries. It wasn't just the financial pressure. There was the constant hum of worry that never left my mind. What if Liam gets sick? What if I get sick? What if we both do? One Thursday afternoon, I caught sight of myself in the bakery's glass display case. My reflection looked older. Shoulders slumped, dark circles under my eyes. It startled me. I hadn't noticed how much I'd changed since the day Teresa left him with me. Liam noticed too. He never said it directly, but I'd catch him watching me while I massaged my neck or took deep breaths before serving the next customer. Sometimes he'd quietly start sweeping the bakery floor without me asking, as if helping with the chores might somehow lighten the invisible load I was carrying. Despite his quiet, reserved nature, I started seeing cracks in his composure. One evening, I found him sitting on the edge of his bed staring at the floor. The toy car with the missing wheel sat on his nightstand. "Hey," I said softly, leaning against the doorframe. Long day. He didn't look up. Some kids at school asked me why I live with you. I told them it's because my mom's busy. They laughed. My stomach twisted. Kids can be cruel, Liam. But you don't have to explain anything to anyone you don't want to. He finally met my eyes. But why doesn't she want me? I sat beside him, the question settling like a weight between us. I wanted to tell him it wasn't that simple, that his mother loved him in her own way, that sometimes grown-ups made bad choices for reasons that had nothing to do with their children. But the truth was, I didn't know if any of that was real. Instead, I said, I don't know why she's gone right now. But I do know this: you matter. You matter to me. He nodded, but the way his shoulders curled forward told me the words only reached so far. The winter wore on. My days were divided between trying to keep the bakery afloat and keeping Liam's life as stable as possible. But every bill that came in reminded me that my savings were draining faster than I could replace them. It all came to a head one icy morning in late January. I slipped on the back steps while carrying a heavy crate of flour. My ankle twisted sharply, sending me to the ground with a pain so sharp it took my breath away. Liam came running, his face pale. I waved him off, trying to hide how bad it hurt. I'm fine, I said, even as I knew I wasn't. By the time I got to the clinic, my ankle was swollen and bruised. The doctor said it wasn't broken, but I'd need to stay off it for at least 2 weeks. 2 weeks without being able to run the bakery properly. 2 weeks of lost income. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table with my leg propped up, Liam brought me a cup of tea. He set it down carefully, then pulled a chair beside me. Do you ever wish I wasn't here? He asked so quietly I almost didn't hear him. The question hit harder than any fall could. I put my arm around him, pulling him close. No, Liam. I never wish that. Not once. I just wish things were easier for both of us. But lying awake later, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't ignore the thought that had been creeping into my mind for weeks. Maybe I wasn't what Liam needed most. Maybe he needed more than I could give, a stability I could no longer promise. The next morning, as snow drifted past the kitchen window, I made myself a promise. I was going to find out exactly where Teresa was, what she was doing, and why she had disappeared. And if she refused to take responsibility, I'd have to start looking at other options, no matter how much they tore me apart inside. What I didn't realize was that the answer to where she'd been all this time would find me first. And it would make my next choice both clearer and far more painful than I ever imagined. The truth came to me in the most ordinary way, a casual conversation that detonated my carefully maintained denial. It was a Saturday afternoon at the bakery, the smell of cinnamon and butter thick in the air, when the bell over the door chimed and in walked Sandra Clark. Sandra was one of those people who knew everyone's business, not out of malice, but because she collected gossip the way others collected stamps. She ordered a slice of coffee cake and leaned on the counter while I wrapped it. Saw someone you know the other day, she said, her eyes narrowing with the pleasure of delivering something juicy. Your sister-in-law, Teresa. I froze mid-wrap. Teresa. I tried to sound casual, but my voice betrayed me. Where, downtown in Millbrook, Sandra replied. She was walking out of that new wine bar, you know, the one with those velvet chairs. She looked like she didn't have a care in the world. Nice coat, fresh manicure, laughing with some man I didn't recognize. The words sank into me like ice water. Millbrook was over 2 hours away, and certainly not the kind of place you went if you were struggling or in hiding. And a wine bar that didn't sound like someone who'd been too desperate or too sick to care for her child. I nodded stiffly, handed Sandra her order, and spent the rest of the day in a haze. My mind replayed her description over and over, laughing, well-dressed with someone new. That night, after I put Liam to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at my phone. I tried her number again, still disconnected. My brother's number rang endlessly before going to voicemail. But now the passivity that had held me back for months was gone. If she could prance around Millbrook without a thought for her son, then she could face me. The next Monday, I closed the bakery early and drove to Millbrook. The wine bar was easy to find, dimly lit, with a gold-lettered sign above the door. I parked across the street and waited. At 6:15 she appeared. Teresa, my sister-in-law in a camel-colored coat, hair freshly highlighted, laughing with a man who held the door for her. They looked like a couple on a date, not like two people burdened with financial ruin or personal crisis. My hand tightened on the steering wheel. I wanted to march across the street, demand she explain herself, but I didn't. I sat there watching her disappear into the warm glow of the bar, my chest aching with a mixture of fury and disbelief. When I got home that night, Liam was at the table drawing. He looked up and smiled. "You're back." That smile, so open, so trusting, cut me deeper than anything else could have. He had no idea that his mother was just a few hours away, living as if he didn't exist. Over the next week, I wrestled with what to do. Part of me wanted to storm into that wine bar during her next outing, drag her into the street, and demand she explain her abandonment in front of everyone. Another part of me feared what that confrontation would do to Liam if he ever saw it or heard about it. So I settled on something quieter but no less determined. I wrote her a letter, a real pen-on-paper letter, and mailed it to the last address I knew. I told her I knew where she was. I told her Liam was with me, healthy, but that I could not and would not keep doing this alone. I told her she had until the end of the month to make a decision, come for her son, or I would be forced to find another permanent arrangement for him. 2 weeks passed. No reply. By then, my patience had calcified into something harder. I could no longer lie to myself. Teresa had no intention of returning, and my brother was complicit in his silence. One night, after putting Liam to bed, I sat in the dark living room, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. My eyes fell on the stack of unopened bills on the coffee table, the half-finished ledger from the bakery, and the small frayed toy car sitting on the armrest where Liam had left it. I picked it up, turned it over in my hand. It was missing a wheel, just as it had been the day he arrived. It wasn't broken from rough play, it was simply incomplete, but still something he kept close. That was when the thought I'd been avoiding became a fully formed decision. If Teresa wouldn't take him, then I would have to find him a home where someone with the stability, resources, and space that I simply didn't have anymore. It wasn't about not loving him. It was because I did. And because love alone wasn't enough to give a child what he needed to heal from this kind of abandonment. I didn't know it then, but making that decision would set the stage for one of the most painful conversations I'd ever have, and the moment that would haunt me long after the house went quiet. The first signs were subtle, so quiet you could almost convince yourself they weren't there. It began with Liam asking to keep the hallway light on all night. At first, I thought it was a simple fear of the dark, but then I noticed the way he'd sit up in bed, knees pulled to his chest, listening for sounds outside his room. He'd jump at the creak of the house settling or the rumble of a passing truck. "Is someone coming?" he asked one night, his voice barely above a whisper. "No, sweetheart," I said, smoothing his hair. "It's just the wind." But the way his eyes darted toward the door told me he didn't believe me. After the trip to Millbrook and the letter I sent to Teresa, I was trying to keep myself composed for his sake. But holding everything in, the anger, the exhaustion, the grief had a way of seeping out in ways I didn't always notice. I caught myself sighing heavily over bills, rubbing my temples in the kitchen, or sitting too long with my head in my hands after closing the bakery. And children, especially ones who've been abandoned, notice everything. By late February, Liam's school called. His teacher, Mrs. Wilkins, said he'd been quieter than usual in class, sometimes staring at the window for long stretches. He'd stopped participating in group activities, and once, when a boy made a joke about people not having real parents, Liam had shoved his chair back and walked out without a word. I promised her I'd talk to him. That night, I made his favorite dinner baked chicken with rosemary and mashed potatoes and waited until we'd cleared our plates before starting. Mrs. Wilkins called me today, I said. He tensed, setting his fork down slowly. I didn't do anything bad. I know you didn't, I said. She's just worried because you've been quiet. Is something bothering you at school? He shrugged. No, not really. Liam. I kept my voice gentle but firm. You can tell me. He looked at his plate. I don't like when people talk about families, or parents, or moms. The word mom came out clipped like it was caught between his teeth. I reached across the table and took his hand. I understand. But I also know you have questions you're not asking me. His eyes flicked up to mine. You said she'd come back? I hesitated. Had I said that? In the early days, maybe when I still believed it could be true. I squeezed his hand. I said I hoped she would. But sometimes, Liam, people don't do what we hope. He pulled his hand back. So she's not coming. I swallowed hard. I don't think so, honey. He stared at me for a long moment, then got up from the table and went to his room. The door didn't slam, it closed quietly, which somehow hurt more. That night, I sat in the living room staring at the closed door of his room and knew I couldn't keep pretending. Teresa wasn't coming. My brother wasn't coming. And I couldn't keep holding Liam in a place of waiting that would never end. It was then that the guilt really began to gnaw at me. Every time I thought about contacting social services, I saw his small frame curled under the quilt my mother had made the way he'd started humming to himself before bed, as if to fill the silence. Every instinct in me screamed to protect him. But another voice, quieter, steadier, reminded me that protecting him might mean letting go. A week later, the bakery had its busiest day in months, thanks to a wedding order. I was up before dawn, the kitchen warm and filled with the scent of baking bread. Liam came in, rubbing his eyes, and sat at the counter. Do you like baking? He asked suddenly. I smiled. Most days, yes. Why? Because you look tired all the time? The honesty of it cut through me. I set down the dough I was kneading. I am tired. But it's not your fault. He kicked his feet against the stool. I could live somewhere else, you know. Then you wouldn't have to do everything. My hands went cold. Why would you say that? He shrugged, but his voice wavered. Just, maybe somewhere with more people. Like a place with a yard. And other kids. I walked around the counter, knelt in front of him, and took his hands. Liam, listen to me. If you ever live somewhere else, it won't be because I don't want you. It'll be because I want you to have everything you need. Do you understand? He nodded, but there were tears in his eyes. That moment sealed it for me. He already knew deep down that my home was a stopover, a place of safety, yes, but not permanence. And the fact that he could see my exhaustion, that he was trying to take care of me in his own way, told me I couldn't wait much longer to make the decision. I spent the next 2 weeks quietly gathering information. I spoke to a social worker named Angela, who explained the process in a voice that was both kind and matter-of-fact. We can look for relatives first, she said. If none are willing or able, we have vetted foster families, and in some cases we place children in group homes. The words group home made my stomach twist. Would I still be able to see him? I asked. That depends, she said gently. If you request ongoing contact and the placement family agrees, then yes. I went home that night with a folder of forms and pamphlets I couldn't bring myself to open. They sat on the kitchen counter for days, an unspoken decision taking up physical space in my home. Meanwhile, Liam grew quieter still. One afternoon, I found him in the backyard sitting cross-legged in the cold, tracing circles in the dirt with a stick. What are you doing out here? I asked. Just thinking, he said. About what? He looked up, his cheeks flushed from the cold. About what it's like to have a mom who doesn't forget you. I sat down beside him, the damp earth soaking through my jeans. You deserve that, Liam. You deserve someone who will never forget you. He looked at me for a long moment, and I think he knew then, maybe before I did, that I was working up to letting him go. That night, I stayed up late at the kitchen table, the only light coming from the small lamp beside the phone. I filled out the forms slowly, each page feeling heavier than the last. By the time I signed my name, my hands were trembling. I told myself it wasn't abandonment, it was giving him a chance. But the truth is, it felt like betrayal, even if it was the right choice. And I knew that when I told him, the look in his eyes would be something I'd carry with me for the rest of my life. I didn't sleep at all that night. The decision was made. All that was left was the hardest part: telling him. The Monday, I made the call to Angela, the social worker. The air felt heavier than usual, as if even the sky knew what I was about to do. I stood in the bakery's tiny office, the hum of the refrigerator in the background, the smell of yeast and sugar wrapping around me in that familiar way that had always been comforting. Not today. My hand hovered over the phone, my mind screaming for one more week, one more day, one more hour. But I knew that waiting wouldn't make the decision any easier, it would only prolong the inevitable. When Angela answered, her voice was the same calm tone I remembered from our first meeting. "Margaret, I'm glad you called. Are you ready to move forward?" I hesitated. I don't know if ready is the right word. But I can't keep him here without hurting both of us in the long run. There was a pause on her end, the kind that holds empathy without pushing. "I'll start the process. We'll need to meet with Liam to talk to him, explain his options in a way he can understand. And we'll need to inform his parents." The last sentence lodged in my chest like a shard of glass. "His parents," I repeated almost bitterly. "They made their decision months ago when they left him here." "Even so, it's part of the protocol," Angela said gently. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the phone in my hand, staring at my brother's number. The last time I had spoken to him was nearly a year ago, before Teresa dropped Liam off. He hadn't answered any of my calls since. I pressed the button before I could lose my nerve. It rang 5 times before he picked up. "Maggie." His voice was cautious, as if he wasn't sure he remembered mine. "Yes, it's me," I said, gripping the phone. "We need to talk about Liam." A pause. "Is he okay?" "He's fine," I said quickly, though the word felt like a lie when weighed against the reality of his quiet sadness. "But he's been here for months. You haven't called? You haven't checked in. And I can't keep raising him alone." "I thought Teresa—" he began, then stopped. "Look, we're not in a position to take him right now. You're his father," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Do you know where your wife is? Do you even care?" Another long silence. "We're figuring things out." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You've been figuring things out for nearly a year. Meanwhile, your son is wondering why his parents don't want him." "Maggie, no." "Listen to me," I cut in. "Social services will be finding him a placement. If you want any say in it, you need to step up now. Otherwise, don't bother calling me again." He didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Do what you think is best." The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, the phone heavy in my hand, realizing I'd just had my last real conversation with my brother. The next day, Angela came to the bakery to meet Liam. I closed early, and the 3 of us sat in the back room with mugs of hot chocolate. She had a warm smile, the kind that made her look like she'd been doing this work for decades. "Liam," she said gently, "your aunt has been taking care of you for a long time, and she loves you very much. But we think it might be time to find a place where there are other children and adults who can take care of you every day." Liam's brow furrowed. "Like a school," "Not exactly," Angela said. "More like a home where there are people who will make sure you always have what you need, clothes, food, friends to play with." His eyes darted to me. "You don't want me anymore?" The words sliced through me. "No, Liam. I do want you. but I also want you to have things I can't give you right now, space other kids, more time with grown-ups who aren't working all day. This isn't because I don't love you, it's because I do." He didn't cry. That almost made it worse. He just nodded slowly, as if this was another thing adults did that he had no power over. Over the next week, Angela worked to find a placement. She called one afternoon to tell me there was a spot in a nearby foster home run by a couple named Robert and Elaine, people with experience caring for children who'd been through abandonment. "They have a yard," Angela said, "and a dog named Max. I think Liam might like it there." When I told him, he asked only one question: "Will they forget me too?" I didn't have an answer, I believed, so I gave him the one I hoped for. "No, they won't." The night before the move, Liam came into the kitchen as I was closing up the bakery's accounts. He held the one-wheeled toy car in his hand. "Can I take this?" he asked. "Of course," I said, my throat tightening. The next morning, we packed his things, the few clothes he had, his school books, the quilt from the guest room. I made him pancakes, but he barely touched them. The drive to Robert and Elaine's house was quiet, the kind of quiet where every unspoken word feels like it's pressing against the windows. When we arrived, Max the dog bounded up to greet him. Liam managed a small smile and crouched to pet him. Robert and Elaine were kind, welcoming, showing him the room that would be his, the swing set in the backyard. I stayed long enough to see him put the toy car on the windowsill of his new room. Then Angela touched my elbow. "It's time to let him settle in." I walked back to my car, each step heavier than the last. I didn't look back until I reached the driver's seat. He was standing at the window, one hand pressed to the glass. I raised mine, and for a moment it was like we were both trying to memorize each other. Then I drove away. The rest of the day was a blur. I went back to the bakery, turned on the ovens, and moved through the motions as if on autopilot. But every time the bell over the door chimed, I half expected to see Liam standing there, backpack slung over his shoulder, ready to come home. That night, in the silence of my house, I realized something painful. I had made the right decision, and it still felt unbearable. The first week without Liam felt like walking through my own house as a guest. It wasn't the kind of emptiness that came from absence alone. It was the silence that seemed to seep into my bones, a silence so loud it felt like it was breathing against my ear. The guest room, still holding the faint smell of his shampoo, was suddenly just a room again, stripped of its small heartbeat and nightly hums. I'd pass by the doorway on my way to bed, catching a glimpse of the quilt neatly folded at the foot of the bed, and my chest would tighten. The toy car was gone from the nightstand, now perched on a windowsill in someone else's house, but I'd see its ghost in my mind every time I looked at that empty space. At the bakery, my customers noticed the change before I even opened my mouth. "Where's your little helper?" Mrs. Dyer asked one morning, leaning across the counter with her usual nosy smile. "He's staying with some friends for a while," I said, keeping my tone light. "Friends?" She repeated, her brows rising in a way that said she wasn't buying it. "Not his mama." I shook my head, already feeling the shift in her eyes, that little flicker people get when they're filing away a new piece of gossip. By the end of the week, I overheard two women in line whispering, "Heard she gave the boy away." After she raised him for all those months, some people just don't have the heart for it. I wanted to spin around and tell them everything: how his parents had vanished, how I'd spent nights figuring out how to keep the bakery running while making sure he never felt hungry or unsafe, how I'd broken myself in two trying to give him both stability and a future. But I didn't, because I knew they wouldn't hear that part. They'd hear only the ending: she gave him up. The weight of their judgment was heavier than I'd expected. It wasn't just strangers either. Friends I'd known for years stopped calling. Invitations to coffee catch-ups dried up. Even my church pew felt colder, the space beside me no longer filled by a boy swinging his legs while flipping through the hymn book. I thought about visiting Liam that first weekend, but Angela advised against it. "Give him time to settle," she said. "Visits too soon can make it harder for him to adjust." I told myself I'd wait 2 weeks, but 2 weeks felt like an ocean. During that time, I busied myself with the bakery, throwing myself into work, like a woman drowning who insists she's just swimming. I took on custom orders, tried new recipes, repainted the front counter. But every success felt hollow without someone to run home to and tell. The worst moment came one Thursday afternoon, when a small boy about Liam's age came in with his mother. He had the same messy brown hair, the same curious eyes. He pressed his nose to the glass display case, pointing at the chocolate chip muffins. For a heartbeat, I almost called out Liam before reality caught up. My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped the tongs. That night I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone. My brother hadn't called. Teresa hadn't appeared. And still people in town acted as if I'd committed the worst betrayal. I was starting to understand something ugly. In small towns, people love a savior, but they love a villain even more. By the time the 2-week mark came, I couldn't stand the waiting anymore. I called Angela. "I'd like to see him," I said, my voice tight. She hesitated. "Are you sure you're ready?" "I've been ready since the day I left," I said. That Saturday, I drove to Robert and Elaine's house. The yard was scattered with toys, the sound of Max's barking greeting me before I even reached the porch. Elaine opened the door with a warm smile. "He's out back playing with the dog." I stepped onto the deck, my heart pounding. And there he was, Liam laughing as Max chased him around the yard. His cheeks were flushed, his hair messier than I'd ever seen it, and he was smiling in a way I hadn't seen for months. When he spotted me, he froze for just a second before running over. "Aunt Maggie." I knelt and he threw his arms around my neck. I held him tight, breathing in the scent of grass and sunshine. "How's it going here?" I asked when we finally pulled apart. "It's good," he said, glancing back at the swing set where another boy was calling his name. "I have a friend, and Max sleeps in my room sometimes." I nodded, forcing my smile to stay steady. "That's wonderful." We spent the afternoon together playing a board game in the living room and helping Elaine bake cookies. But I noticed something he never asked when he was coming back with me. When it was time to leave, he hugged me again, but not with the same clinging desperation from before. This hug was lighter, more certain, as if he knew where he belonged now. Driving home, I cried for the first time in weeks, not because he seemed unhappy, but because he didn't. It hit me then the real loss wasn't in letting him go. It was in realizing that for him, my home had been a safe harbor in a storm, but not the final shore. And as much as it hurt, maybe that was what I had been for him all along, the place he could rest until he was ready to move on. I thought I was done with Teresa. After all, what else could there be to say between us? She'd left her son on my doorstep like an unwanted package, vanished for months, ignored every call, and forced me to make the kind of decision no one should have to make. But the thing about people like Teresa is they have an uncanny sense for the exact moment to show up, usually when it's least convenient, and when they can cause the most disruption. It happened on a Tuesday morning, about 3 weeks after my first visit to see Liam in his foster home. I was in the bakery arranging croissants in the front display case when the bell above the door chimed. I glanced up expecting a customer. Instead, there she was, Teresa in a red coat that looked far too expensive for someone who'd supposedly been struggling. Her hair was perfectly styled and her makeup was flawless. For a moment, I just stared at her, my hands frozen over the tray. She looked exactly as she had the day she left Liam with me, the same glossy, self-assured air, except now there was something sharper in her eyes. "Hello, Maggie," she said, her smile thin and calculated. I forced my voice to stay even. "What do you want, Teresa?" I heard she said, taking a slow step toward the counter. "That you put my son in an orphanage." The word orphanage landed like a slap. "He's in a foster home," I corrected sharply. "A good one. With people who care about him. People who didn't abandon him." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't you dare talk to me about abandonment. You had no right to make that decision." He's my child. I laughed, bitter, humorless. Your child. The one you dropped off with no clothes, no plan, and no explanation. The one you ignored for nearly a year. That child. She flinched, but only for a second. You could have called me. I did. I snapped. Over and over. I called you. I called my brother. I even sent you a letter. You chose not to respond. She crossed her arms. I was dealing with things. Things I stepped out from behind the counter, my voice rising. You were in Millbrook, Teresa, drinking wine dressed to the nines with some man who wasn't my brother. That's what you were dealing with. For a moment, something flickered across her face, surprise that I knew. Then her mouth tightened. You think you're so righteous, Maggie, but you gave him away. You're no better than me. That cut deeper than I expected. The difference, I said quietly, is that I stayed until I couldn't anymore. I fed him, clothed him, kept a roof over his head, and loved him. I made sure he went somewhere safe. You just left. There was a silence so tense, it felt like the whole bakery was holding its breath. A customer walked in, took one look at us, and quickly walked back out. You'll regret this, Teresa said finally, her voice low and venomous. When he grows up and hates you for what you did, I hope you remember this moment. I met her gaze steadily. If he hates me because I wanted him to have a chance, I can live with that. But if he hates me because I let him rot while pretending I could take care of him, I couldn't. Her nostrils flared, but she didn't say anything else. She turned on her heel and left the bell above the door jingling in her wake. I stood there for a long time, my hands gripping the counter until my knuckles ached. My heart was pounding, not just from the confrontation, but from the realization that she might try to interfere with Liam's placement. Sure enough, 2 days later, Angela called. Teresa came to see me. She said, her voice tight. She said she wants Liam back. My stomach dropped. She's not fit. I know, Angela interrupted gently. The state knows too. She has no stable home, no job, and there's evidence of neglect. But she can still cause trouble by filing a petition. We'll have to prepare for that possibility. For the next week, I lived with a knot in my chest. I kept picturing Liam settled, laughing with Max in the yard, being yanked back into Teresa's chaos. The hardest part was knowing that if she showed up at his foster home, he might not understand the danger. Children cling to the idea of their parents even when those parents have failed them in every way. When I visited him again that weekend, I didn't mention Teresa. I didn't want to plant fear in his mind. Instead, I brought him a new set of colored pencils, and we sat at the kitchen table in Robert and Elaine's house, drawing side by side. At one point, he looked up from his paper. Are you mad at someone? I blinked. Why do you ask? You're squeezing your pencil really hard, he said. I forced a smile. I guess I am. Maybe I'm just thinking too much. He went back to coloring, but his words stayed with me. No matter how much I tried to shield him, he could still feel the undercurrents. That night, I made myself a promise. If Teresa tried to take him, I would fight with everything I had left. Not because I wanted to keep him for myself, but because I couldn't let him go back to someone who would only abandon him again. I didn't know yet that the next confrontation between us would not be in private. It would be in front of half the town, and this time, everyone would hear exactly what she had done. It happened on a Saturday morning, the kind of morning where the town square is alive with chatter, the farmers' market set up under bright awnings, and every resident seems to have a coffee in one hand and gossip in the other. I'd gone to the market to pick up fresh berries for the bakery. The air smelled of fresh bread and roasted nuts, and for a moment I felt almost normal. But as I was weighing a basket of strawberries, I heard my name, Maggie. I turned, and there she was again, Teresa, standing just a few feet away, dressed in a pale yellow sundress, sunglasses perched on her head. She was holding a to-go cup and wearing that same calculated smile I'd come to hate. For a split second, I considered ignoring her, but then I saw how she wasn't alone. 2 women from town, women who had stopped coming into my bakery since Liam left, were standing nearby, their eyes flitting between us like they were settling in for a show. Teresa closed the space between us, her voice loud enough for the small crowd forming to hear. "So have you told everyone yet? About how you threw my son into the system like he was yesterday's trash?" The words were like a slap, not because they were true, they weren't, but because she wanted them to land that way. I straightened, set down the strawberries, and looked her dead in the eye. "Do you want to do this here, Teresa?" She tilted her head, faux innocence dripping from her tone. "Why not? Everyone should know what kind of person you really are." By now, more people had stopped to watch. My heart was pounding, but I felt something else rise in me too, that slow, steady burn of righteous anger that had been simmering since the day she left Liam on my doorstep. "All right," I said, my voice clear enough to carry. "Let's tell them." A murmur went through the crowd. I took a step forward. This woman showed up at my house one afternoon, dropped her son off with a backpack that had 2 shirts, 1 pair of jeans, and a broken toy car. She said she'd be back in a few days. She never came back. Teresa's smile faltered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. "I was dealing with personal issues," I cut her off. "Your personal issues involved living in Millbrook with a man who wasn't your husband, drinking at wine bars and pretending you didn't have a child. Meanwhile, I was feeding him, clothing him, making sure he got to school every day." The whispers started immediately. People turned their heads toward her. "I called you," I continued. "Dozens of times. I called my brother. I sent letters. I begged you to come for him, to at least talk to him on the phone. You didn't respond. Not once. For nearly a year." "That's not—" "It is," I said sharply. "And when my savings were almost gone, when my health was breaking, when I realized I couldn't give him everything he needed, I made sure he went to a home with people who could. People who didn't see him as a burden. People who wouldn't just walk away." Her face was tight now, her eyes darting to the onlookers. "You made that decision without me. You made it for yourself," I said. "The moment you walked away." A voice from the crowd, an older man who'd been a regular at my bakery, spoke up. "Is that true, Teresa?" She didn't answer. She adjusted her sunglasses, her mouth a thin line. I took a breath, steadying myself. "I didn't give him away because I didn't love him. I gave him a chance because I did. You want to be angry with me, fine, but don't you dare stand here and pretend you were the one who put him first." For a long moment, the only sounds were the wind rattling the market tents and the shuffle of feet as people shifted uncomfortably. Teresa's gaze darted from face to face, searching for support that wasn't there. Finally, she huffed, muttered something under her breath, and walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement. The crowd dispersed slowly, but the whispers now carried a different tone, not condemnation, but understanding. One woman approached me as I picked up the strawberries again. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't know." I nodded, though the knot in my chest didn't loosen, because winning a public argument didn't change the fact that Liam was gone, or that the image of him standing at the foster home window with his hand pressed to the glass still haunted me every night. Still, as I walked back to my car, basket in hand, I realized something had shifted. The town might still talk, but now they knew the truth. And Teresa. She had lost the one thing she craved more than custody, the illusion of control over the narrative. I used to think memories were soft things like flower dust in sunlight, lovely, harmless, easy to brush off your sleeves. But there are memories with edges. They cut when you touch them. The day I took Liam to his placement, the day that hallway smell welded itself to my bones, disinfectant and laundry soap, and something like old crayons, that memory isn't soft. It has corners. It still bruises when I turn too quickly. It began with a phone call from Angela. "There's a formal intake this Friday," she said. "Not a court date, just the paperwork and a chance for Liam to meet the school counselor who works with our kids. It helps with transitions." Transitions. Such a calm word for a cliff. I baked through the nerves. 6 trays of cinnamon rolls. I didn't need a sheet pan of lemon bars that perfumed the whole bakery, then a rye loaf because something about the heft of it steadied my hands. I boxed 2 rolls in a white pastry carton and wrote his name on the lid with a dull pencil, then crossed it out. The possessive loop of the L felt too much like a claim I no longer had the right to make. Friday came cold and bright. Frost filmed the grass and turned the world to sugar. I wore the cardigan he'd once called my blue cloud sweater and tucked his quilt, my mother's quilt, into a cloth bag. I told myself I was bringing it only until he didn't need it anymore. I told myself so many things. When I pulled up to the family center, Max's nose smudges were still on Robert and Elaine's back door window, and Liam's soccer ball sat half hidden under a rhododendron. I thought of knocking and asking for 5 more minutes. But some goodbyes need a boundary. I parked across the street and waited until Angela's silver sedan turned into the lot. She saw me lifted a hand in that quiet, anchoring way of hers, and I exhaled for what felt like the first time all morning. Inside the family center was all soft colors and laminated posters with feelings charts: happy, worried, angry, calm. The receptionist wore a sweater with tiny pears on it and smiled like she meant it. I clutched the bag with the quilt the pastry carton balanced on top. When the elevator doors opened, I smelled that mix. I'll never forget pine disinfectant paper, a lingering hint of hot chocolate, and for a moment I wasn't sure my legs would carry me. They did. Grief is perverse like that. It gives you just enough strength to walk yourself through it. Angela led me to a small room with 2 comfy chairs, a low table scattered with colored pencils, and a fish tank burbling in the corner. "He'll be in soon," she said. "The counselor, too. We'll keep it simple. You don't have to do anything except sit with him." She hesitated. "If you need a break, signal me. But I suspect you won't." I opened the pastry box, set the rolls on napkins, and tried not to arrange them like an altar. When the door opened, Liam came in first, then Elaine, then a young woman in a navy dress with kind, curious eyes. "Hi, I'm Dana," she said. "I work with kids on transitions. Can I sit here?" Liam's eyes flicked to the pastries, then to the bag at my feet. "Is that your quilt?" I said. "And 2 cinnamon rolls. I didn't know if you'd want them now or later." He slid into the chair close enough that his knee touched mine, and for a moment it felt like the hundreds of nights we'd sat together on my couch watching those silly competition shows where people baked unrealistic cakes shaped like dragons. I nudged a roll toward him. Still warm. He picked it up with both hands, took a bite, and breathed out a tiny sound that was almost a laugh. "It tastes like Saturdays." I swallowed. "Good Saturdays, I hope. The ones where you let me put extra glaze." "I did not let you," I said. "You stole it when I turned around." His mouth twitched. "You turned around very slowly." It would have been so easy right then to pretend this was just another errand, doctor, dentist, a quick stop at the post office. But Dana sat crossed, one leg over the other, and said softly, "Liam, do you want to tell Maggie what we talked about last time?" He glanced at me. "We made a plan." He spoke like he'd rehearsed it. "I'm going to stay at Robert and Elaine's this year. I'll go to the school by the park with the big slide. And I get to do the art club on Wednesdays." Angela added, "And there's a schedule for visits that we can adjust if it's too much." He nodded, eyes on the fish tank now. "I want to visit, but not too soon." Dana says sometimes visiting too soon makes it harder. I had to inhale carefully to keep my voice even. Dana is very wise. He looked back at me, then really looked, and there was this hard-won steadiness in him that hadn't been there before. Can I bring the quilt today?" "It's yours," I said. "It always was." He touched the bag with a kind of ceremony, then took another bite of roll, so big frosting streaked his cheek. "I wiped it with a napkin the way you do for kids without thinking automatic, tender, dangerous," and he didn't flinch away. We colored for a while because the room made that seem like the only sane thing to do. He drew a house with a crooked chimney and a dog so round it looked like a loaf. "That's Max," he said. "But he's bread." "Appropriate," I said. "Everything in our world turns into bread eventually." "Except fish," he said, considering the tank. "They turn into secrets." Dana looked at me pleased. He was joking. Joking meant air was getting into places that had been tight. There was paperwork, of course. There is always paperwork. Angela slid forms toward me and Elaine, and our pens made that soft scratching that feels like time leaving. Emergency contacts, permission for counseling, medical info. I wrote my number 3 times because writing it once felt like abandonment. I signed my name next to sentences that said I wasn't his guardian. Not now. Maybe not ever. The pen dug a groove in my finger I expected to find still there the next morning. It was. Before we wrap, Dana said we like to end with something predictable. A little script so kids can hang their feelings on something sturdy. She turned to Liam. "Do you want me to read the goodbye or do you want to try it?" He shrugged. "I can." She nodded. "Okay. Remember, you can change any words you want." He faced me squarely, small shoulders squared in a courage that didn't feel small at all. "Aunt Maggie," he said, voice very careful, "thank you for taking care of me when I needed you. I'm going to live at Robert and Elaine's now. I will be okay there. I will miss you. I will see you again on a day we pick." The script was so simple it almost mocked the complexity between us. But simple can also be true. I swallowed and used the words she'd offered me earlier in the packet. "Liam, thank you for letting me be your safe place. I love you. I am glad you will be okay. I will miss you. I will see you again on a day we pick." He nodded like a soldier. Then, without warning, he launched himself across the small space, cinnamon frosting and all, and wrapped his arms around my neck. I hugged him back, pressing my face into his hair, which smelled like the shampoo we'd picked out at the grocery store because it promised dragons on the bottle and delivered only tea tree. There are hugs that say, "Don't go," and hugs that say, "I'll be all right." This one had both tangled like threads that won't separate. When he let go, he wiped his face with the back of his hand and made a face at the frosting streak he left there. "Oops. I'll bill you for the mess," I said, because humor is a bridge when the river rises. We walked out together, me with the empty pastry box, him with the quilt bag, and that's when the hallway reached up and took me by the throat. The bulletin board crowded with flyers for parent groups and chess club, the scuffed baseboards, the buzzing light, the echo of footsteps. His sneakers squeaked and then fell quiet as he adjusted how he walked. He always did that, careful about noise in other people's places. We paused at the door to the lobby where the air smelled less like disinfectant and more like cocoa. The receptionist with the pears on her sweater waved. He waved back, solemn like a traveler acknowledging customs. Outside, the sky had the washed blue look of late afternoon in winter. Angela squeezed my shoulder. "Do you want a minute?" "I want a year," I said. "But a minute will do." Elaine knelt to help him tuck the quilt under his arm. Robert jingled the car keys in that gentle dad way that says no rush, but the engine is cold. I crouched to be eye level. "Do you want me to walk you to the car?" He shook his head, surprising me. "Can you stand here? I want to see you when I look back." It split me cleanly and somehow sewed me back together at the same time. "I can stand here," I said. "I'll be right here." He started toward the car, then turned and came running back for one last quick squeeze, the kind children give when they're learning the art of leaving. "Bye, Aunt Maggie." "Bye, love." He went then. Across the small stretch of parking lot, careful steps, quilt under his armhead a little high, the way it gets when boys decide for themselves to be brave. He climbed into the back seat. Max's leash hung from a hook near the door like a promise about later. He turned, pressed his palm flat to the window. I lifted mine palm to palm, a thin sheet of glass and a winter of decisions between us. They pulled away slowly. He kept his hand up as long as he could. I stood and watched taillights merge with the ordinary flow of town traffic. A delivery van, a nurse's compact, a teenager's car with a dented bumper. Everything moving forward like the world hadn't just tilted. I stayed until the lot was empty, until my breath fogged and vanished and fogged and vanished again. On the drive home, I realized I'd left the empty pastry box in the little room by the fish tank. The thought unmoored me. How many small, unimportant things had I left in rooms that weren't mine? A coffee mug, a scarf, the sound of my voice saying you're safe here, the smell of cinnamon, the invisible fingerprint of hope on a laminated feelings chart. Back at the bakery, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat at the front table in the dusk and listened to the building settle, the muffled tick of cooling ovens, the sigh of the wall heater. After a while, I pulled a napkin from the holder and wrote a letter in blunt pencil because paper felt kinder than a glowing screen. Dear Liam, today smelled like laundry soap and hot chocolate and a little like fish. You were brave. I was proud. I am proud. Next Wednesday, I'll put a cinnamon roll aside just in case you're nearby. When you feel sad, imagine the bakery at 6 a.m., the ovens exhaling the glass, fogging the first batch humming. That sound means beginnings. You deserve 1,000 of them. Love, Aunt Maggie. I folded the napkin like it was fine stationery. I would not mail it. Some words are written to steady the hand that writes them. The phone buzzed once on the table, an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer. Then I did. Maggie. My brother's voice, thinner than I remembered, lighter, like it had been bleached. I heard there was... today. There was, I said. I waited. He didn't ask which today. He hadn't earned it. He stopped. I hope he's okay. He is, I said. I felt the ache sharpen when I said it aloud. He will be. I'm sorry, he tried. You're late, I said, and hung up before he could hand me a smaller, easier version of apology than the situation allowed. That night, I carried the bag he'd once kept by the door, the one he wouldn't unpack because he never trusted that he could stay to the guest room. It was empty. I set it on the bed beside the folded quilt that wasn't there anymore. Loss is literal like that. You can point to the space it leaves. In the morning, I unlocked the bakery as the sky turned the soft apricot of mercy. I brewed coffee, warmed the case, and slid a single cinnamon roll onto a small plate behind the counter. I didn't put his name on it. I didn't have to. It was for him in the way that certain songs are for the person you loved, even when they aren't around to hear them. When the bell chimed and the first customer came in, an older man with a newspaper tucked under his arm, he sniffed and smiled. "Smells like Saturdays," he said. I smiled back, steady enough to mean it. It does. And for the first time since that hallway, I believed the roll would not go to waste even if no one ordered it. I believed in the invisible math of love, how it multiplies when given away, how it returns strangely quietly through a child's steadier laugh, a dog's leash hanging from a hook, a winter sun that keeps rising whether or not we're ready. He was gone and not gone. He was elsewhere, and he was held. The sound of his footsteps had faded down a long institutional corridor, and still the echo remained, not as torment but as proof. Some memories have corners. This one also has a door, and I am learning hour by hour how to leave it open. People think that once the child is gone, the story ends. That you pack away their belongings, close the door to the empty room, and move forward like you've just finished reading a book and can set it back on the shelf. It doesn't work that way. The truth is, you keep hearing them in the house long after they're gone. It's not even ghostly, it's muscle memory. I'd find myself setting an extra plate at the table before realizing no one was coming to fill it. I'd turn down the TV volume in the evening so Liam could sleep, even though the guest room was silent. The first month after that final meeting at the family center, my life moved in strange circles. The bakery was busy, maybe busier than before, but there was no one to tell about the day's sales or the way Mrs. Jenkins had tried to haggle me down on a scone. The house without his sneakers by the door or his school books spread over the kitchen counter felt larger and emptier at the same time. I told myself to be grateful for the quiet, grateful that Liam had a yard to play and a dog to curl up with, and a school where he could just be another kid instead of the boy everyone whispered about. But I didn't expect how much that quiet would feel like punishment. The town, for the most part, had stopped talking. After the confrontation with Teresa at the market, word spread about what she'd done, or rather, what she hadn't done. There were still a few people who gave me tight, polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes, but the sting of being silently judged began to fade. One afternoon, Robert called the bakery. "Thought you might like an update," he said. I could hear children's voices in the background, Liam's among them. "He's doing well. Made the soccer team at school. They're not keeping score at his age, but he's treating every game like the World Cup. Elaine says his art teacher's impressed too." Something loosened in my chest. "I'm glad," I said. And I was. Truly. Then Robert added, "He mentioned you last night. Said he misses your cinnamon rolls. Asked if you'd visit soon." That small, unguarded sentence lodged in me like sunlight through a crack in the blinds. He missed me. We arranged for a visit the following weekend. When I pulled into their driveway, Max bounded toward me, first tail wagging furiously. Liam followed, taller than I remembered, his hair shaggier. He had that same wide smile he'd worn at the family center when he saw me come in with the quilt. We spent the afternoon in their backyard kicking a soccer ball until my legs ached, then sitting at the picnic table while he showed me a sketchbook full of dragon soccer scenes, and on one page, the bakery drawn from memory. "That's you," he said, pointing at a stick figure behind the counter. "And that's me eating a cinnamon roll." I laughed, but my eyes stung. "You got the icing just right." Later, Elaine invited me to stay for dinner. We ate spaghetti while Max begged under the table, and I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't for months. There was no tension here, no waiting for the other shoe to drop. When it was time to leave, Liam hugged me hard. "Next time," he said into my sweater, "can you bring cinnamon rolls? I'll bring 2 dozen, I promised." Driving home that night, I realized something: Liam was going to be okay. And not just okay in the sense that he'd survive this, he was going to thrive. I also realized that my role in his life had changed. I wasn't his guardian anymore, or the person who made sure he brushed his teeth and did his homework. But I was still part of his story, and he was part of mine. That knowledge didn't erase the ache in my chest when I walked into my empty house. But it did make it easier to breathe. I had thought love meant holding on with everything you had. Now I understood it could also mean letting go and trusting that what you gave would keep them warm even when you weren't there. It was a gray morning in early spring when the letter came. I almost didn't open it right away. I was in the middle of glazing a batch of hot cross buns at the bakery, and the envelope sat on the counter beside the register like an afterthought. No return address, but the formal block of type in the corner told me it wasn't junk mail. I slid it open between customers, skimming the first few lines. My stomach dropped so hard it was like the floor had given way beneath me. Notice of petition for custody. Teresa had filed with the county court. For a moment I thought I must be reading it wrong. The words blurred my heartbeat loud in my ears. But there it was in black and white: she was claiming she was ready to resume full parental responsibility for Liam. And she had listed my name, my bakery address, and even my cell number in the section marked related parties. I had to grip the edge of the counter to steady myself. A customer came in just then, and I managed to serve her without letting my hands shake too visibly. But inside, panic was crawling up my spine. As soon as the bakery closed for the afternoon, I called Angela. She already knew. She filed late last week, Angela said, her voice calm but firm. "We've been gathering documentation to oppose it. I didn't call you right away because I wanted to have more information." "What does this mean?" My voice was thin. It means there will be a hearing. The court will decide if she's fit to regain custody. Given her history, I don't believe the judge will grant it, but, but Teresa's the biological mother. The system leans toward reunification whenever possible, even when it's not always in the child's best interest. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing Liam at Robert and Elaine's, his new friends, his soccer team, his art projects. All of it swept away because Teresa decided she wanted to play mother again. And I didn't trust her want to last longer than the attention it might get her. The next morning, I called a lawyer. His name was Peter Crawford, a man in his early 60s, with a kind, weathered face and a voice that sounded like it had been built to tell people hard truths gently. "You don't have legal custody, Maggie," he said, after I'd explained everything. "Technically, you don't have a legal standing in this case, unless the court invites you to testify as a witness. But that's exactly what I'm going to push for. Testify." The idea made my mouth go dry. "You were Liam's primary caregiver for almost a year. You have first-hand knowledge of his circumstances, and you can speak to the neglect he suffered before he came to you. That's valuable." 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting outside a family courtroom, the air smelling faintly of coffee and floor polish. Robert and Elaine were there too. Elaine with her steady hand on Robert's knee, Robert flipping through a manila folder as if looking at the documents again would make them stronger. Angela was there, her presence like a quiet wall behind us. And then, Teresa walked in. She looked polished, of course, tailored blazer silk scarf hair perfectly blown out. She carried a slim leather portfolio and wore an expression that blended confidence with disdain. When her eyes met mine, her mouth curved into that small, smug smile I'd seen at the bakery. The hearing began with the judge reviewing Teresa's petition. Her lawyer painted her as a woman who had overcome personal hardships and was ready to resume her rightful role as a mother. They spoke about her stability and deep emotional bond with her son, words that made my jaw clench. When it was my turn, Peter called me to the stand. My palms were damp as I swore to tell the truth. "Maggie," Peter began, "can you describe the circumstances under which Liam came to live with you?" I told them everything. The knock on my door, the backpack with 2 shirts and a broken toy car, the promise of a few days that turned into months. I described the unanswered calls, the letter I'd sent, the way Liam flinched at the mention of his mother the night I caught him trying to count the money in my savings jar, so I wouldn't have to worry. Teresa's lawyer tried to rattle me during cross-examination. "You admit you eventually placed Liam into the foster care system, correct?" "Yes," I said evenly, "because I couldn't give him everything he needed, and because his mother had abandoned him without warning or support." "Or because you wanted to be rid of the burden," the lawyer pressed. I felt heat rush to my face. If I'd wanted to be rid of the burden, I could have called social services the day he arrived. I kept him for nearly a year. I fed him, clothed him, and made sure he had a safe place to sleep every night. I made the decision to place him because I loved him enough to want him to have more than I could give. The judge watched me closely as I spoke. When Robert took the stand, he testified about Liam's progress since joining their home, how he'd gone from a withdrawn, cautious boy to a kid who laughed, played, and made friends. Elaine described his art, his soccer games, and the bedtime routine they'd built together. Teresa sat stiffly through it, all her fingers tightening around her pen. After closing arguments, the judge said he would review the case and issue a decision within a week. That week was one of the longest of my life. I tried to distract myself with work, but every time the bakery phone rang, my stomach lurched. When the call finally came, it was Angela. The petition was denied, she said. The judge cited a lack of evidence of sustained stability on Teresa's part and strong evidence that Liam's current placement is in his best interest. I sat down on the bakery's flour-dusted stool, my hands trembling with relief. So she can't take him. Not unless she can prove significant long-term changes in her situation. And that takes more than words in a courtroom. When I saw Liam the following weekend, I didn't tell him about the hearing. I just hugged him a little tighter, knowing that for now, and hopefully for a long time, his world wouldn't be upended again. But as I watched him run across Robert and Elaine's yard, Max bounding alongside him, I couldn't shake the knowledge that Teresa might try again someday. And if she did, I'd be ready to stand in that courtroom all over again. Because whatever my official title was or wasn't, I knew the truth: I had been his mother when it counted. It was late summer when I saw Liam again. The air had that heavy sweetness that comes right before the first leaves start to turn ripe peaches at the market-cut grass baking under the sun, a faint hint of dust from the dry stretch of road into town. Elaine had called the week before. "We're having a barbecue next Saturday. Nothing fancy. You should come. Liam's been working on something he wants to show you." I told her I'd bring dessert, which of course meant cinnamon rolls. Not the neat dozen I sold at the bakery, but the big messy kind. Liam always liked the ones I glazed until they dripped over the edges. When I pulled into their driveway, the yard was alive with the sounds of summer laughter, a dog barking the rhythmic thud of a soccer ball being kicked. Max bounded toward me, first tail wagging so hard I thought he might tip himself over. Liam followed, taller and leaner than I remembered, his hair sun-bleached at the tips. "Aunt Maggie," he yelled, and in 2 seconds he was in my arms. He smelled like grass and sunscreen and something warm that I couldn't name, but would have recognized anywhere. "You've grown," I said, holding him out at arm's length. "I'm faster now, too," he said, grinning. "Watch." Before I could answer, he darted across the yard, Max chasing him in happy, chaotic loops. Robert waved from the grill and Elaine came over to hug me. "He's been counting down to today," she said. "And he's been drawing. A lot. He wants to show you something." After lunch, hot dogs, corn on the cob, potato salad, Liam disappeared into the house and came back with a large sketch pad. "I made this for you," he said, handing it over like it was something fragile. I opened it to find a drawing of the bakery. It wasn't perfect. The proportions were off, and the lettering on the sign leaned sideways, but it was alive. The windows glowed with light, and through the glass you could see 2 stick figures, one behind the counter, me, and one on the other side, holding a giant cinnamon roll hymn. Above us, in crooked block letters, he'd written, "Smells like Saturdays." I laughed, but my eyes blurred. "It's perfect," I said. "I'm going to frame it and hang it in the bakery." He beamed. "Good. Then you'll remember me every time you look at it." "As if I could forget you," I said, ruffling his hair. The rest of the afternoon passed in the easy rhythm of people who no longer have to explain themselves. Liam showed me his new room, the shelves lined with books, the art supplies neatly stacked on his desk. He introduced me to his best friend Jonah, a boy from school who came over with grass stains on his knees and a smile just as quick as Liam's. Watching them together was like watching a door open. Liam wasn't the cautious, guarded boy I'd first met at my doorstep. He was still thoughtful, still observant, but now there was a looseness to him, a lightness in his movements. At one point, Elaine caught my eye from across the yard. She didn't say anything, just gave me a small, knowing smile. She could see it too, the way he'd settled into himself here. When it was time to leave, Liam walked me to my car. Max tried to follow, but Robert called him back. "Next time you come," Liam said, leaning against the car door, "can we bake together?" "Like before?" "Absolutely," I said. "We'll make a mess so big Elaine will have to ban me from the kitchen forever." He laughed. "Deal." I hugged him one more time before getting in the car. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him standing there waving. The sun was behind him, turning his hair to gold. That night, back at the bakery, I cleared a space on the wall behind the counter. I framed the drawing and hung it there, the words, "Smells like Saturdays," catching the morning light the next day. Customers noticed immediately. "Who made that one?" asked. "A very special artist," I said, and I meant it. Over the next few weeks, I found myself thinking less about what I'd lost and more about what Liam had gained. I was still part of his story, but I didn't have to be the whole of it. He had more now, more people, More love, more chances. And maybe that was the point all along. The ache in my chest was still there, but it had changed. It wasn't sharp anymore. It was the kind of ache you get when you've run far enough to know you can stop and rest because the person you were running for has already made it home. It was a cool October morning when Elaine called. "I thought you'd want to know," she said, her voice bright. Liam's art teacher entered one of his drawings in the county fair competition. He won first place. The award ceremony is next Saturday. We'd love for you to come. I didn't even have to think. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The week before the ceremony, I found myself lingering in the bakery's back room after closing, thinking about what to bring him. Flowers felt too formal. A store-bought card was too impersonal. Finally, I decided on something that had always been ours, a cinnamon roll, big enough to need both hands glazed until it gleamed. I'd wrap it in a bakery box and tie it with twine the way I did for special orders. The morning of the ceremony, I woke early, not because I had to, but because I was restless. I baked the cinnamon roll just for him, letting the smell fill every corner of the shop. The act of making it, measuring, kneading, watching the dough rise steadied me, the way it always had in the past when the world felt unpredictable. By the time I pulled into the county fairgrounds, the autumn sun had burned off the last of the morning chill. The air was full of kettle corn fried dough and wood smoke from the BBQ pit. Children darted between stalls with painted pumpkins and bags of candy, their laughter blending with the distant hum of the carousel. Elaine waved from near the small stage set up beside the craft pavilion. Robert stood beside her, his arm around Liam, who was holding a framed certificate almost as big as his torso. When he spotted me, Liam broke into a grin and ran over. "Aunt Maggie." Look, I crouched so we were eye to eye. First place, I read, pretending to gasp. "Wow. Does this mean you're famous now?" "Not yet," he said, his voice bubbling with excitement. "But my picture's hanging inside with the other winners. Want to see?" I handed him the bakery box. "I made this for you. You can share it. Or not." He peeked inside, his grin widening. "Not," he said, laughing. Inside the pavilion, his drawing hung on a display board, a detailed pencil sketch of a dog in mid-leap, max, of course, with such motion in the lines that you could almost hear the bark. The shading was careful, the eyes full of life. Beneath it, a ribbon fluttered gently in the draft from an open door. "It's incredible," I said, and meant it. He rocked on his heels, suddenly shy under the praise. "I drew it after Max caught the frisbee in the park. I wanted to make it look like he was still moving." "He is," I said. "Every time someone looks at it, he's moving." We spent the rest of the morning wandering through the fair. Liam wanted to ride the carousel twice, and I didn't say no. He played the ring toss and won a stuffed bear, which he promptly handed to a little girl who had been crying when she lost. "You're a good kid," I told him quietly. He shrugged as if it was nothing, but I could see the pride in the way he walked afterward. At the award stage, his name was called again for a group photo. I stood off to the side with Robert and Elaine, watching him stand among other young artists, his posture straight, his smile easy. It struck me then how far he'd come from the boy who wouldn't answer questions in class or look people in the eye. When the ceremony was over, we sat on a bench near the food stalls, splitting a bag of kettle corn. Liam told me about his friends, his soccer games, the art projects he wanted to try next. He spoke with a lightness that didn't need my reassurance every few sentences. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, I knew it was time to leave. I hugged him tightly, the kind of hug that says, "I'm proud of you," without words. "Will you come to my next game?" he asked. "You tell me when, and I'll be there," I promised. Driving home, I thought about how different this goodbye felt from all the others. It wasn't heavy or uncertain. It was just natural. Like we'd both accepted that our story didn't need to be written in the same house to keep going. That night, I took his framed bakery drawing down from the wall just long enough to dust it. My fingers traced the words, "Smells like Saturdays," and I realized they didn't ache the way they used to. They felt warm now, like the memory of fresh bread on a cool morning. Liam was growing, and so was I. I've learned that stories don't really end, not the ones that matter. They don't have a clean last chapter with a tidy bow. They fade into other stories, new ones connected by threads you sometimes can't see until much later. Liam's story didn't end the day he left my house, or the day the judge denied Teresa's petition, or even the day he stood on the county fair stage with his ribbon and framed drawing. And my story didn't end when I let him go. It changed. The bakery, once a place I came home to after taking care of him, became my home again in a way it hadn't been before. But it wasn't the same home. The walls felt different, the air lighter. Customers noticed the framed drawing behind the counter. Some asked about it, and I'd tell them it was from a special boy who taught me how strong people can be when they're given the right kind of love. The gossip that had once swirled through town had gone quiet. In its place were small kindnesses, people leaving extra tips or asking if I needed help carrying flower deliveries. I didn't kid myself that everyone suddenly understood my choices, but enough people did. And those who didn't, I stopped caring as much. Every few weeks, Liam and I would talk on the phone. Sometimes it was short, just updates about school or a story about something silly Max had done. Other times we'd talk until Elaine gently reminded him it was bedtime. He always ended the call the same way: "I'll see you soon." And we did see each other. Soccer games, art shows, an occasional weekend afternoon where we'd bake together at the bakery after hours. We'd end up with flour in our hair and frosting on our sleeves, laughing at the mess like we used to. I watched him grow taller, his voice getting that first hint of change, his drawings becoming more detailed. I also watched him become more confident in who he was, not just in the safety of Robert and Elaine's home, but in himself. That was the part that made me proudest. One quiet Sunday evening, months after the fair, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea. The street was still the sun, a thin line dipping below the trees. I thought about the first night Liam had stayed in my guest room, how small he'd looked under the quilt, how careful he'd been not to take up space. If I'd known then what was coming, the sleepless nights, the strain on the bakery, the stares in the grocery store, the bone-deep ache of letting him go, would I have opened the door that day? Yes, without hesitation. Because here's the truth. I'd learned sometimes, love is not forever in the way we picture it. Sometimes it's a bridge you build for someone else to cross, knowing you'll stay on the other side. You don't cross with them, but you make sure it's sturdy, safe, and pointed toward somewhere better. That's what Liam had given me too, a bridge out of the kind of loneliness that sneaks up on you in middle age when you think you've already learned all the lessons you need. He reminded me I could still open my door, still risk my heart, still choose someone even if I couldn't keep them. Teresa never tried again to take him back. Whether it was because the court ruling broke her pride, or because she found another distraction, I didn't know. And I stopped needing to know. Her absence no longer defined Liam's life, and that was enough for me. The last time I saw him before winter, he came into the bakery on a Saturday morning with Robert and Elaine. I hadn't expected them, and when the bell above the door rang, I almost didn't look up until I heard Aunt Maggie. He ran to the counter, cheeks flushed from the cold, and I leaned over to hug him. "What's the occasion?" I asked. "Just wanted a cinnamon roll," he said, grinning. I boxed one up for him, the biggest I had, and as I handed it over, he said, "It still smells like Saturdays." After they left, I stood in the warm bakery, the morning light spilling over the display case, and I let myself feel it, the bittersweet mix of joy and longing, pride and loss. It didn't hurt the same way anymore. It was a softer ache, like the echo of a song you used to play every day and still know by heart. I knew there would be a day when Liam wouldn't need me much at all, when visits would be fewer, calls less frequent. And when that day came, I would be ready. Because I hadn't just given him a safe place for a while, I had given him the tools to build his own. So here's what I know now: letting go doesn't mean disappearing. It means staying rooted enough that if they look back, they'll see you there. Not holding them, not holding them back, but holding space. And for me, that's enough. If you've ever had to let someone go, a child, a friend, even a piece of yourself, you'll understand. This love is not always measured by how long you keep them close, but by how willing you are to let them become who they're meant to be. That's what I did for Liam. That's what I'll do again if life asks it of me. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can say is not stay, but go and know you are loved every step of the way.